All right, so today we're going to really dive deep into the world of HR. More specifically, what it really takes to be a human resources officer. And you've been going through RoleCatcher, which just for anyone who's maybe not familiar, it's this really cool platform that has just a ton of resources for anyone looking to, kind of up their game in their career. So we've got excerpts from their career guide, we've got practice interview questions, we got it all. But I think maybe just to get us started, why don't we start with like the basics? Like, what does an H officer actually do?
Yeah, a lot of people, I think when they picture HR, they think of like hiring and firing.
Mm.
Um, but it's so much more than that. Really, you're kind of like the architect of the whole employee experience. You're thinking about company culture. You're making sure the company's attracting and keeping really great talent, which, let's be honest, can like make or break a business these days.
No pressure, right? But seriously, though, the Role Catcher Guide lays it all out. It's everything from like developing job ads to figuring out the actual day-to-day
Yeah.
working conditions, handling payroll and benefits, like you name it, they do it.
Oh, yeah. And all the legal stuff, too. Like HR has to stay updated on all those employment laws and make sure the
Ah.
company's actually, following the rules.
Okay, so you're wearing like a million hats as an HR officer. One thing that really jumped out at me from like going through all this Role Catcher stuff is how much technology is changing like everything. They kept saying over and over again, like, you need to be tech savvy. And that's not even like a nice to have. It's like you have to know this stuff.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense when you think about it. Like the way people even find jobs now is totally different. You've got those applicant tracking systems.
Hmm.
Everyone's using AI to screen resumes. So HR professionals are having to learn this whole new set of skills. And at the same time, still remember, there are actual humans applying for these jobs.
It's like finding that balance between like using the tools to be more efficient, but not, turning into a robot yourself in the process. And then on top of all that, you've got this whole explosion of remote work. I feel like HR is still kind of scrambling to figure out like, how do you even build a company culture? How do you manage teams when everybody's all over the place in different time zones?
For sure. The guide even mentioned that employee engagement is a huge focus now. And that's got to be so much harder to do when you're talking about remote or hybrid teams.
Hmm.
Like it's not as easy as just doing like, Friday beers in the office anymore. You have to get creative to build those connections when everyone's virtual. It makes you wonder, like, how do you even measure engagement when you can't actually see how people are feeling day to day?
Yeah.
These are the questions that like HR is really wrestling with right now.
Yeah, it's a whole new world. And speaking of new worlds, I think maybe we should talk about what it actually takes to be that HR guru. Like, how do you navigate all this tech and remote work and everything else? The Rollcatcher excerpts actually get into the specific skills you need. And it's not just like your typical boring list of buzzwords. They actually get into the why behind it all.
Right. And they don't just tell you what the skills are. They give you real examples of how to actually use them, which is huge because it's one thing to say you're a good communicator or you're adaptable, but it's way more powerful if you can actually walk someone through a time you had to like deal with a difficult employee
Yeah.
or a time when you had to implement a new software system or something. Those concrete examples make all the difference.
It's like they're giving you the cheat codes for the HR job interview.
Yeah.
But even beyond just getting the job, knowing how to talk about your skills is super important for like moving up in your career too. And actually, speaking of which, Rollcatcher also goes into the different stages of an HR career path, which I thought was super helpful to see like how you can actually move up in this field.
Yeah. They make it clear that you're not just stuck in one role forever. You might start out at the entry level, maybe helping out with recruitment, doing some initial screenings and things like that. But as you gain more experience, you can move into more strategic roles. Like maybe you're the one developing those talent acquisition plans or even managing a whole team of HR professionals.
So you can actually see how your impact grows as you move up in your career. And I feel like that's got to be motivating for people.
Definitely.
And it all comes back to those core skills we were talking about.
Totally.
Like you might start out just learning the basics of employment law, but eventually you could be the one advising like the top leaders in the company on how to handle those tricky legal situations.
Exactly. It shows you that there's a lot of room to grow in this field.
For sure. And that's actually a perfect segue because where Rollcatcher gets really impressive is they don't just leave you hanging with all this information. They actually give you tools to put everything you've learned into practice.
Yeah. And these aren't just like generic career tools.
Yeah.
They're specifically designed for the challenges that HR professionals face. Like, remember how we were talking about those automated recruiting systems?
Yep.
And how it feels like sometimes your resume just disappears into a black hole?
Oh, yeah.
Well, RoleCatcher actually has AI that analyzes your resume and the job description and tells you how well they actually match up.
Wow, that's
It's
amazing.
like having an inside look at the system. So you're not just crossing your fingers and hoping you're using the right keywords. You actually get concrete feedback on how to make your resume stand out to those algorithms.
That's incredible. And on top of that, they have this massive library of practice interview questions, like over 120,000 of them, all specific to HR roles.
And they're not just like random questions. They cover a huge range of topics. So you'll get asked those behavioral questions like, tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult employee. But also more strategic questions about like talent management and company culture and stuff like that.
Right.
It's basically like having a crystal ball for your HR interview.
Okay, maybe not a crystal ball, but you get the idea.
Right.
They've clearly thought of everything to help you make a good first impression, but I think even beyond that first interview, these tools can help you actually thrive in an HR role.
Oh, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, technology can be super helpful, but it's really your human skills that will set you apart in this field. Like being able to connect with people, understand what motivates them, navigate those tricky ethical dilemmas we were talking about. That's what makes a great HR professional.
That's such a good point. And maybe that's the most important thing to take away from this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
Yeah, the HR field is changing so fast with technology playing a bigger role than ever before. But at its heart, it's still about people. It's about creating a work environment where people feel valued and supported and empowered to do their best work.
And that's something worth thinking about. Whether you're just starting out in your career or you've been doing HR for years, as we rely more and more on technology, how do we make sure that human connection doesn't get lost in the shuffle? That's the question I really hope people will continue to think about.
That's a great note to end on. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of HR. We've covered a lot of ground, from the evolving responsibilities of the role to the essential skills and tools you need to succeed. But as always, the learning doesn't stop here. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep striving to build a more human-centered workplace. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
Yeah, it's a whole new world. And speaking of new worlds, I think maybe we should talk about what it actually takes to be that HR guru. Like, how do you navigate all this tech and remote work and everything else? The RoleCatcher excerpts actually get into the specific skills you need. And it's not just like your typical boring list of buzzwords. They actually get into the why behind it all.
Yeah.
Right? Like they highlight active listening, for example,
Mm-hmm.
which, might sound kind of basic, but it's so crucial for HR.
Mm.
You're dealing with people's careers, their personal lives sometimes. Like there's a lot of emotion involved. So if
Right.
you're not really, truly listening and picking up on what's going on beneath the surface,
Yeah.
you're not going to be effective at all.
Yeah, it makes me think of those like classic workplace sitcoms where the HR person is like totally clueless and out of touch. Active listening is like the opposite of that.
Exactly. And then there's critical thinking, which is huge in HR. I mean, think about it. You're constantly having to weigh different perspectives. You're often dealing with these like ethical gray areas.
Right, like what happens when you have an employee situation that goes against company policy, but then maybe there are these other extenuating circumstances. Like, how do you even begin to make those decisions?
Exactly. HR has to be able to look at the big picture, assess the risks, and make those tough calls.
And the cool thing is the guide actually gives you like concrete examples of this stuff. Like they have all those sample interview questions. And one of them is literally, how do you stay up to date on employment laws and regulations? So they're not just telling you to like memorize a textbook, they're showing you how that knowledge actually gets used in the real world.
Right. It's one thing to say you're adaptable. It's another thing to be able to tell a story about a time you had to adapt to a major policy change or something. Those concrete examples are so much more powerful.
It's like they're giving you the cheat codes for the HR job interview. But even beyond the interview, knowing how to articulate those skills is huge for career growth too. And speaking of which, RoleCatcher also maps out like the different stages of an HR career path, which I thought was super helpful to see.
Yeah, it's really cool how they break it down because it shows you that you're not just stuck in one role forever.
Yeah.
You might start out at the entry level, maybe assisting with recruitment, doing those initial screenings and things like that.
Yeah, like getting your foot in the door.
Yeah, exactly. But then as you gain more experience, you can move into more strategic roles, like maybe you're developing those talent acquisition plans, or even managing a whole team of HR professionals.
So you can really see how your impact grows alongside your career, which I think is super motivating.
Definitely.
And it all ties back to those core skills we were talking about.
For sure.
Like you might start out just learning about employment law, but eventually you could be the one advising leadership on how to navigate those tricky legal situations.
Right. It's really cool to see how that progression can play out.
It's like they've laid out the whole roadmap for you from like entry level all the way up to HR rock star. But here's where RoleCatcher goes from like helpful to seriously impressive. They don't just like throw all this information at you and then say good luck. They actually give you the tools to put it all into practice.
And the tools are really designed for like the specific realities of today's job market. You know, like we've been talking about how competitive it is, especially in HR, and how technology is changing everything. And RoleCatcher seems to really get that, and they've built these features that address those exact challenges.
Totally. Like, remember those automated recruitment systems we were talking about? Like those algorithms that scan your resume, and it feels like you're just throwing your resume into a black hole.
Oh, yeah.
Well, get this. RoleCatcher actually has AI that analyzes your resume and the job description, and it tells you how well they match up.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah.
Because it takes all the guesswork out of tailoring your resume for every single job you apply for.
Right.
You're not just hoping you're using the right keywords anymore. You're getting like real feedback on how to make your experience stand out to those algorithms.
It's like having a secret weapon.
Right.
And speaking of secret weapons to help you get your foot in the door, they have this massive library of practice interview questions.
Yeah, I saw that.
Like over 120,000 of them.
It's incredible.
And they're all specific to HR roles.
And they cover like everything from those classic behavioral questions like, tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult employee, to more strategic questions about talent management and company culture. It's pretty amazing.
It's like they've compiled every HR interview question ever asked.
Basically.
So they've given you all the tools you need to make a great first impression. But I feel like even beyond that initial interview, these tools can help you actually thrive in an HR role long term.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, technology is a tool.
Yeah.
But it's your human skills that will really make you successful in this field.
So true.
Like being able to connect with people on a human level, understand their motivations, being able to navigate those really complex ethical dilemmas we were talking about earlier. That's what makes a truly great HR professional.
You know what? That's such a good point. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from this whole deep dive. The HR field is changing so fast right now. Technology is playing a bigger role than ever before. But ultimately, it's still all about people. It's about creating a workplace where people feel valued and supported and empowered to do their best work.
And that's something I think everyone should be thinking about, whether you're just starting your career or you're a seasoned executive. As we become more and more reliant on technology in every aspect of our lives, how do we make sure that we're not losing sight of that human connection?
That's such an important question and a perfect note to end on, I think.
I agree.
So thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of HR. We covered a lot of ground today, from the evolving role of HR to the essential skills you need to the tools that can help you succeed. But the learning doesn't stop here, so keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep striving to build a more human-centered workplace, no matter what your role is. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.